Hi, I'm Maddie. Welcome to the Faith Community YouTube channel. We'd love to know where you're joining from in the comments. And hey, take a moment to share this message with a friend and then hit the red subscribe button. Also, if you'd like to learn more about getting connected at Faith Community, stick around at the end of the video for more details. We hope this message encourages you to move from where you are to where God wants you to be.
We want to jump back into Nehemiah. And if you're like me, anything that's past 2 weeks, I tend to lose track of, right? It's just part of it. I have to be reminded. And so I'm just going to kind of do a quick little Cliff Notes version to catch you up. And if you remember Nehemiah and the Israelites, they're captives in Babylon. And he's cupbearer to the king, which means he's serving the king. And he gets report that the city of Jerusalem is in ruins, its walls are destroyed, that some parts have been rebuilt, but others are just left in rubble. And so as he prays and waits and listens for the Lord's direction, he feels the need to approach the king, and God leads him to approach the king, and the king grants him favor and mercy, even supplies to go back to Jerusalem and begin construction on the walls of the city. And in 52 days, think about that for a minute, because we're not talking like our little yards that they put a fence up. But in 52 days, these people, they accomplished building the walls around. And we've been in this series for a little bit, and the theme has been the rebuilding, restoring, and renewing of God's people. And I want to continue that theme because the first half of Nehemiah has been all about the building of the walls. And if you were like me and you grew up in church to some degree, Nehemiah is always referenced to the building of the walls. And now the walls are built and they're up, and you're like, wasn't that the end? And it's no, because God still has work to do, because at the end of the day, it's not so much in rebuilding the city, although the city of Jerusalem was an illustration for the nations around them of who God was and what he was about and how he delivered his people and saved his people and redeemed his people. But it's all about the rebuilding, restoring, and renewing of people. And that's the image that Nehemiah gives us. And so I want to jump in chapter 7. And if you've read ahead of me at any point or been reading along with us in this series, you will see that there's 5 scriptures that are really, really good. And then 60 plus scriptures of just names that you or I cannot pronounce on any level, right? It's just like name, census, this person, the number of people in the family. And you're going, dear God, I thought I was past this from Chronicles, right? But there's some significance here, and so I want to start, and I'm just going to read the first 5 verses, and then we're going to dive in and take a look at this today. It says this again, Nehemiah chapter 7, and this is the NLT. It says, after the wall was finished, I had set up the doors and the gates. The gatekeepers, singers, and Levites were appointed. I gave the responsibility of governing Jerusalem to my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, for he was a faithful man who feared God more than most. That's a beautiful thing to be said about you right there. And then I said to them, do not leave the gates open during the hottest part of the day, or keep the gates of Jerusalem closed until the sun is hot. And even while the gatekeepers are on duty, have them shut and bar the doors. Appoint the residents of Jerusalem to act as guards, everyone on a regular watch. Some will serve at sentry posts, some in front of their own homes. And at that time, the city was large and spacious, but the population was small, and none of the houses had been rebuilt. So my God gave me the idea to call together all the nobles and leaders of the city, along with the ordinary citizens, for registration. And we've been in this series, and I was reading some commentary, and Warren Wiersbe said this of Nehemiah chapter 7, and I want this to resonate with you, so follow along with me. It says, a city is much more than walls, gates, and houses. A city is people. And in the first half of this book, the people existed for the walls, but now the walls must exist for the people. It was time to organize the community so that the citizens could enjoy the quality of life God wanted them to have. God had great things in store for Jerusalem. For one day his son would walk the city streets, teach in the temple, and die outside the city walls. See, God always sees the end from the beginning. He always has a vision that far outlasts what we can see or what we can think. And it's no different even in this scenario in Nehemiah, that God has orchestrated everything to bring us to this point where the walls are up around the city. And for most of us, if we're honest, we can look at that and go, man, what an accomplishment, right? This is so good. Look at what God did. And it's worthy of our praise. And I think it's worthy to celebrate that and look at that accomplishment. I mean, in 52 days, right? A lot of us can't get anything done in 52 days, much less building a wall around a city. But they did it. But that wasn't it. That wasn't the only thing. Nehemiah was beginning to recognize that there was more to this whole project than just building these walls and just setting up all of these habits, if you will, or, structures in place and these programs in place. It was more about driving something. And Nehemiah recognized, and we see this right at the very beginning, that he needed to invite more people in. Like, he wasn't going to be able to accomplish this. He did a great work and did what God had called him to do, but now to lead the people further into the vision and the plan of God, he needed to invite people in. And we see right away that he invites two people. The first one is Hananiah. And that was his brother. And if you go back to the very beginning, this was the individual that would have written Nehemiah and let him know that the city walls were in destruction, that they were ruined. There was just rubble everywhere. And so this was the guy that let Nehemiah know and instigated this whole process for him to begin to pray. And so Nehemiah invites him in because of his concern and care for the city. And then Hananiah we see as a man that's faithful and fears God more than most. And right from the beginning, we see something unique, that if we want God to continue to build in our lives, continue to carry his vision out in our lives, we need to invite other people in to be a part. And we need two things out of those people. One, they need to love us. And two, they need to love God. And we see that in these men. And the beautiful thing about that is if you go back and you look at the meaning of their names, it also speaks something else. And so Hananiah means gracious, and Hananiah means grace and mercy, or the favor of God. And so right from the beginning of this chapter, what we're recognizing is Nehemiah is making a call and a challenge to the people, and even in us, that even though the walls were complete in 52 days, it wasn't because of us in and of ourselves or the people in and of themselves. It was the grace and the mercy and the favor of God that allowed them to do this work. And so he's challenging them right from the beginning that the victory that came over the enemy, because we know there was opposition, right? The enemy wanted to come and halt the construction, but they pushed through because of that grace, that mercy, that favor that only God can afford. And the beautiful thing is Nehemiah is kind of reorienting the people right here. And he's saying and challenging them that it's time to shift focus from the external to the internal. And I resonate with this so much because I can sit back a lot of times, and when you accomplish something, are you like me? And you're like, man, that's good, right? Like, there's something nice about when you have a checklist, right? And you get that little check mark and it's done. You're like, look at what I accomplished. And I think it would have been really easy for the people of Israel right there, the people in Jerusalem, to just kind of, man, look at that. Look at what has happened. And even saying, God, what a great work you did, and kind of sit back. But Nehemiah is challenging the people that the true intent of the wall hasn't been fully revealed. In fact, it had just started, and that they must remain vigilant. And now that's a word I don't use a lot. I don't know if you use it a lot. And in fact, this week as I was studying and preparing, I was talking with Tabitha all week, and I'm like, vigilant. See, I did it already. Vigilant is a great word, but I kept saying vigilant every time I would say it. And so I'm just going to ask you this morning that if I go through, instead of saying vigilant, I say vigilant, you're just like, okay, we know what he means. We're good. He's making up his own words. okay? But we got it down. We're going to roll with you. You're not going to be a grammar police. You can come up to me later and go, hey, you kept saying that word. Because the funny thing is I was doing really, really good last night as I was just going through it and making sure I was there. And then I read it in the early service this morning and was telling them how much I struggled. And it just seemed like it all came back because it was vigilant everything instead of vigilant. And so just hang with me this morning. But I wanted to dive into that word because, like I said, it's not a word that I typically use in everyday conversations. But this is what it means. It says the action or state of keeping careful watch for possible danger or difficulties. Forbearance of sleep, a state of being awake, watchfulness, circumspection, attention of the mind in discovering and guarding against danger or providing for safety. See, and that's the challenge that Nehemiah is offering. All these individuals who had just put in the effort and the work of building the wall, that they need to be vigilant in guarding. Why would they need to guard? Isn't that what the walls are for, right? Think about it. A city that has no walls is vulnerable, right? The enemy can come from any direction at any point, and you may not be able to have enough of a defense to withstand it, and they would just have been captured again. And so it was significant for the walls to go up because it did offer protection. But why is Nehemiah challenging the people to stay on guard and protect these walls? I mean, the walls are up, the gates are in, they're closed, but Nehemiah goes, hey, bar the doors, shut the gates. Only have them open at select times, and even when they're open at select times, somebody needs to be there. Somebody needs to be on watch. Why is that? Because the enemy's still present. The enemy's still around. Just because the walls are up, it doesn't mean the enemy's like, well, they did what they said they were going to do. I guess we got to pack it up and go on. We can't get in now because the walls are up. No, the enemy would then be actively looking at ways they can take advantage of the people. Sure, there were some safeguards in place. It wasn't going to be as easy for the enemy to get back in, but there were still ways, and the enemy was going to begin to search that out and see what that is. And can you imagine if you've done all this work of building this gate and these walls only to not have somebody protected, and the enemy could just walk in undiscovered? Or the enemy could find a way up and over the wall and you'd have no idea. And so Nehemiah is imploring them. He's challenging them to stay vigilant in guarding. Even though they had accomplished a great task, they had accomplished what God had called them to do at the first part of this. But if they were to fall asleep or they were to leave a gate unguarded, it could be all for naught because the enemy could just slip right in and cause chaos and terror in the midst. And Proverbs 4:23 tells us this. It says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And I think this is a reminder right here that no matter what the work we've done, because I fall into this trap, God will be challenging me to put habits and practices in my life so that I can continue in the vision that he's called me to get, and I will accomplish those things. But if I'm not careful, I rest right after I do that, in the sense of, man, look at what has taken place. And a commentator said this. He said, in the Christian life, often a victory is won and later lost because there was no guard. An enemy may come in because we're not watching. Walls can be climbed if there is no one there to stop the enemy. But the enemy is easily turned back from the wall that is guarded. And I think Nehemiah is doing more than just reminding the people of the physical enemy, but the spiritual enemy that could creep into their hearts, because it can be really, really easy after a success, after building these practices, whether it's with your finances, your family, maybe in your relationships, whatever the case may be, you can get this victory, and that's good, and it needs to be celebrated. But then we kind of rest, right? And we kind of sit back and we say, well, I did what I was supposed to do, and that's good. And what happens is unknowingly we stop guarding those things, the very principles that we set in place to safeguard our relationships. There's a little bit of a crack in the gate, and the enemy can slip in and bring someone in unnoticed, and we need to be on guard. and watching for that. Because there is an enemy that seeks to steal, kill, and destroy each and every one of us. And here's the thing about the enemy is he's kind of deceptive. He knows how to kind of find, I always say, those little chink in the armor, right? And try and slip in. And sometimes he can make something look really, really good until all of a sudden it's in your life and it's not real good, right? And that was the reason of not only barring the doors, but setting up the individuals, the people to be in place to watch. Because it can be really, really easy to not notice something from a distance. But the closer it gets, it comes into better perspective. And so for the people, if they were at the gates, if they were at the walls watching, they could see where the enemy was coming from and potentially redirect their forces to defend before the enemy got right up to the door or in the door. And it's no different for you and I. Because I would ask you this question: what is God building in your life, and what part of the kingdom has he invited you into to build? Because that's what he does. He wants to build more in our lives, but then it begs the question is what do you need to protect? Where have you maybe grown a little bit lazy, a little bit sleepy, and that you've done some good work, but maybe you think that's enough, and God's going, no. Your focus needs to be re-engaged, because lack of focus leads to lack of guarding. And this, I believe, is why the word and the voice of God is so significant in our lives. Because he has a way of revealing what the enemy's doing to us. And that can come in a variety of ways. It can come from daily studying his word, listening to the Holy Spirit, or listening to those that trust God and live for him. They can supply that word to you that can awaken you or refocus you to see when the enemy desires to attack and where he desires to attack from. And so Nehemiah's challenging them. Stay on guard. Vigilant. Be vigilant in protecting yourselves. And then he shifts to say, be vigilant in worship. And that's the singers and the Levites. And the singers would have been the worship, the praise. But that's not all that worship is. I think it's a great part. It enables us to really draw in, to focus who God is and what he wants to do. And we need worship in our lives. But the Levites there, what they were doing is they would have been the ones that would have been in the temples, getting the sacrifices and kind of restoring the relationship between God and the people through all of the animal sacrifices, the peace offerings, all of those things. And so the walls weren't rebuilt so that the people could sit and stare at those walls, right? How fun would that be, by the way, right? Like, who wants to do that? Like, I'm just gonna sit. But how many of us do that in our lives? We build something, and instead of letting it do its purpose, we kind of sit down and stare at them, right? I don't know about you, but I do that. But here, the walls were built so people could return to worshiping God with a greater glory and freedom than they ever had, right? That's why the walls were built, so that they could get back to putting God at the center of everything, putting Jesus at the center. And so the walls afforded them an opportunity to take the breath and not have to be so on guard from the enemy. Not that they weren't guarding, but that they could give time to focus to Jesus, to get him to the center place of their life. But how quick is it that we forget that? It becomes really, really easy for us to say, look at my progress, look at my gains, look at whatever. But what happens in that moment is that we forget the grace and the mercy and the favor that God has put on our lives that has gotten us to this place. And our focus begins to shift from him to whatever it is. You know, a good way to notice when you've lost sight of God's mercy, grace, and favor is you stop offering that mercy, grace, and favor to those around you. And I find that so often in my life, even with the people that are close to me, my family, my daughters, is that when I've lost my focus, or Jesus isn't the center for me, man, do I ever take it out on them. Right? That grace and that favor, it's not there. They leave a cup out and I'm ready to throw the cup at them. I don't do it, okay? I'm just saying. Or they don't put the trash bag in the right way, right? And I'm like, you do realize that they give you the trash bag and then you push it down. That's why the seams on the outside, it's got to go on the inside. Seams don't go on the outside, they're on the inside. No, that's just the thing. If you want to learn how to put a trash bag in right, come talk to me. We'll be good. But our focus gets off. And I was thinking this week, especially in regards to that, and I was remembering a quote that Jeff Deo, he was a worship leader back when I was in high school and had some amazing songs and redid some of the worship there. He made this statement, and it's always resonated in my life. He said this: anything that is more exciting to me than God is an idol. Think about that. Anything that is more exciting to me than God is an idol. And man, that just hits me every time I say it. Because if you've known me for any length of time, you know I'm a sports guy. Like, I talk about sports. I probably bring it up in way too many conversations. And some people are like, we don't need to talk about it. And I still want to, right? Like, I'm still a little bit miffed that the Blues, I mean, they won last night, but they gave up a 3-goal lead, right? Like, I'm just like, you can't win that way, guys. And it's there, right? Like, that's my mind. But I have found that the reason that is always so significant to me and sports are such a big deal in my life is because I was reminded this week of how much God used sports at critical junctures in my life to instill character in me. It was able to create this passion for people that I have. And he used sports to do that, and used sports in some of the most difficult times in my life. And it was wonderful, and that's why I'm drawn to those things. But what I've also become aware of is I can allow the tool that God wants to use to become the thing I rely on most versus him. I can allow sports to be the thing that I derive most joy from when it shouldn't be. It should be God. And see, the Levites, the singers, they were there as a reminder that the walls are not our protector. God is our protector. That's what they were there for. That's why Nehemiah installed them and put them in place, was so that the focus would be, Jesus, it's on you. Everything we've accomplished, everything that's happened from the beginning, getting the supplies from the king to rebuild, all the way to building the walls in 52 days. It's because of you, Jesus. It's because of your grace and your mercy and your favor. It's not because of what I've done. It's because who you are in me. It's not the program that I went through. It's you, Jesus. It's not the principles that I put in place. It's you, Jesus. Now, are those things wrong? No. We need those things. Those things are the wall. They have their place. They're important. Don't stop doing those things. Just recognize what those things are and what they're there for. That's the significance here. And so my question is what are you worshiping? What is getting the most attention or focus in your life? Maybe it's something you need to reconsider. And the final kind of component in this first few chapters, and really the rest of the chapter, because it's 60 some odd verses of just names, right? How many did the skip? Is this name? Okay, I'm gonna skip down like 5 verses. Right, same type of thing. I'm gonna go down a little bit further. Like, it's the skim process comes into play right there. When you read through, you find that there's significance in that. From the outside, just looking at the page, all the numbers, all the names of the families, it can seem just like, oh, that's cool. They just want us to know who was there. But it was important. It was important because they were vigilant and serving God. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians Chapter 15, it's the last verse, 63, says, "So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless." And I love that Paul makes that statement. Nothing you ever do for the Lord is useless. So why the list of names? Like, what's the significance here? And I think, and most commentators believe the same thing, is that the list was important because they were important to God. See, they were important to God because they did what so few of their other Jews did. They chose to leave Babylon and come back to the promised land. See, after they had already set down their roots, because they've been in captivity for 70 years. 70 years. So they had set down roots in Babylon. They've been kind of wrapped in to their culture, their customs, maybe even have developed a thriving business where they were. But yet they were leaving that. And Nehemiah chose to honor those as a reminder to us that we have to be vigilant in serving. Because here's the thing, they left what was easy for something that would ultimately be better. Tabitha said that earlier in the service, and I was like, you stole that from me. But I stole it from her first because she said it while we were talking this week. But it's believed that only 2% of the Jews that were exiled to Babylon came back to Jerusalem to be a part of the rebuilding of the city. Think about that, 2%. 2% gave up everything that they had built over the last 70 years, their family dynamics, and left to follow God's word and God's vision for their lives. The other 98%, we don't know why they chose not to. We can take some guesses and stabs, and I believe that it's really simply kind of comes down to this. What's known is always better than the unknown, I guess. It's more comfortable in the known, even if it's dysfunction, even if it's exile, even if it's just abuse to a degree. Sometimes it's easier to be in the known than it is to be in the unknown, because we don't know what's out there. And I can't say that I fault them, but the reality is God has called us to so much more. And often, Pastor Josh has said this, and it's just kind of resonated with me. Often God doesn't give us a map. He gives us a compass. He just says, hey, start moving in this direction and let me be God. And the unknown of that can scare us, can set us back on our heels a little bit, because fear is often easier than faith. Fear can cause us to do a lot of things that we said we would never do. And what it boils down to is, man, it's just hard sometimes to walk in faith, to know that what God has called me to do, I'm going to do, even though it may not look like it right now. I mean, Jesus, after all, said the road to life is narrow. And so anytime you step out and do the thing that God has called you to do, can I tell you something? You will probably be in the minority. I mean, look at culture. But these people, they decided they were going to be vigilant and serving God and doing what he asked, what he called them to be. And so again, what are you serving this morning? What are you serving in life? What are you putting the most effort into? Is it your relationship with Jesus? Is it what he's called you to? Or is it what you think is going to get you ahead in life? Because sure, that may be easy right now. But like Tabitha said, it's not always better. His way is better. His way is life. And so what does that mean for you and I? What does all of that mean if we wrap it up? And I think to really understand that question, you have to go and recognize what the opposite of vigilance is. And you know what that word is? Complacency. And if you're like me, the first thought you have when it comes to that word is kind of like laziness. It's kind of comfort. But as I kind of researched that word and really kind of looked at it, the dictionary, Webster's dictionary, defines it this way, and it was just really kind of struck me. It says this, it says, marked by self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. So what does that mean? It means that it's not a lack of willingness to work, it's a lack of seeing a need to keep working. A lack of seeing a need to keep working. You don't have to raise your hand. I'm not trying to call you out as far as from a public forum, but how many of us in life are being vigilant in our walk with Jesus, or has complacency become the pattern in our life? It's not that we don't know what we need to do. We just don't have the willingness to continue to work. And look, I'm with you. There's a lot in my life that I have to shift and move, especially when it comes to raising my kids, where I spend most of my time. All of those things have to be questions for me, and I hope they are for you as well. Because are you being vigilant or complacent in your marriage and in your relationships? Have you kind of just put it on cruise control? As a parent, as a guardian, as an employer or an employee. And I think the biggest question is in your relationship with God and following Jesus. Have you been vigilant in that, guarding and worshiping and serving? Or have you become complacent in that? Said, I know where I'm at. I know what God has done. Maybe I know what I need to do, but things are good. I don't want to rock the boat. It's kind of easy right now. Like, I'm in cruise control mode, right? And hear me, there are times where we're going to have to focus on one area of our life, those walls. And they need to have our intention, and we can't lose sight of everything else while we're working on that wall. Because remember, as they were building the wall, think about this. They're picking up bricks, putting it in place, and then they're also holding a sword just in case the enemy comes, right? How exhausting at times it can be to just continue to serve God and build this wall, which we need to do. But we can't forget that God has a bigger vision than just that one component. Yes, he wants to use that to grow us, shape us, and form us. But we can't gain a little victory and lose the sight that comes from the vision of God. We need to rest. We need to celebrate. We need to continue to build, because living a life following Jesus is not a momentary thing. It's a daily choice. It's a daily choice. And here's the thing. Most of the time, the building work isn't all that important. What's significant, what's important is the benefit that the building work has done in the lives of God's people. It teaches us how to work hard. It teaches us how to work together. It teaches us how to work through adversity and attack. And it teaches us how to work until the job's done. And so those moments are significant. They're important. But vigilance or complacency. Because see, we can sit back and be satisfied with good enough, or we can choose to invite God back in, partner with him to be formed by him and build his kingdom. It's harder, but it's better. It's more challenging, but it comes with abundant life. You want to know how you choose? How you choose vigilance versus complacency? You choose it by your actions, by your words, and by your thoughts. You choose it by the life you live, by the words you speak, and I think the hardest one, what you think. Because I don't know about you, but it's really, really easy for the enemy to get in here. It's really easy to mess up my thoughts. And when it happens, man, I become so complacent in life. See, Nehemiah chapter 7 shows us that these people had a pioneer spirit. They were willing to go to the unknown. They were willing to endure hardship and discomfort because they had a call from God that was more important than their life in Babylon. It was more important. Sure, life was easier in Babylon, but life in Jerusalem would be better. It would be better. I pray that that's said of us in our lives, that we're willing to say, God, I'm going to do the work that is necessary to build you in my life and to build your kingdom. And I'm going to stand guard to protect it. I'm going to be vigilant in worship and in serving.
Thanks for joining us today. We're always seeing new faces, and we would love the opportunity to meet you. Text NEW to FAITH to 97,000, and someone from our team will be in touch to answer any questions you have about Faith Community. And if you made the decision to follow Jesus today, text that same word, NEW to FAITH, to 97,000. Our team would love to celebrate with you and get some resources to you.
We also want to stay in touch on social media. We're there throughout the week posting content we believe will encourage you and help you move from where you are to where God wants you to be. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well as YouTube. And speaking of that, if you're joining on YouTube, make sure you hit that red subscribe button and the bell icon so you're the first to know when new content is available.
And finally, we know life can be challenging no matter where you're at on the journey, and we would love to come alongside you in prayer. Let us know if we can pray for you by sending us an email or on the app.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.